I want to share something with you today that I've been thinking about deeply, something that keeps me up at night. And it's not just about money or markets or economics. It's about the fundamental patterns I've observed over my 50 years of studying history, markets, and human nature. What I'm about to tell you is a message I believe everyone needs to hear right now because we are living through one of the most critical inflection points in modern history. You see, throughout my career at Bridgewater Associates, I've had the privilege of witnessing multiple market cycles, economic transitions, and geopolitical shifts. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched currencies collapse and new world orders emerge. And through all of this, I've developed what I call a template, a framework for understanding how the world works. And right now, that template is flashing warning signs that I cannot ignore. Let me take you back to when I first started seeing these patterns. It was after the 2008 financial crisis. I realized that what we had just experienced wasn't unique. It had happened before, many times throughout history. So I began a deep study, going back 500 years, examining every major empire, every reserve currency, every debt crisis, and every major conflict. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about how the world operates. I found that there are three major forces that drive virtually everything in our world: the long-term debt cycle, the internal order cycle, and the external order cycle. And here's what's remarkable and frankly terrifying. All three of these cycles are converging right now, simultaneously, in a way that hasn't happened in our lifetimes. In fact, the last time these three forces aligned like this was in the 1930s and 1940s. We all know what happened then. Let me explain what I mean by each of these cycles and why their convergence matters so much. First, the long-term debt cycle. This is a pattern that typically plays out over 75 to 100 years. It starts when a country's debt levels are low, credit is cheap, and there's room for expansion. People borrow, invest, and the economy grows. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. More borrowing leads to more growth, which leads to more confidence, which leads to even more borrowing. This is the upswing, and it can last for decades. But here's the problem. Debt is essentially pulling forward future consumption. When you borrow money today, you're promising to pay it back tomorrow with interest. Eventually, the debt burden becomes so large that it starts to constrain growth. Interest payments eat up more and more of people's income. There's less money available for productive investment. The economy slows, and when the economy slows, it becomes harder to service the debt. This is the downswing. Now, where are we in this cycle today? We're at the point where debt levels across the developed world are at or near all-time highs. The United States has a total debt to GDP ratio of over 350% when you include government, corporate, and household debt. That's higher than it was during the Great Depression. Japan is even worse. Europe is struggling under massive debt burdens. And here's the kicker. We've kept this system going by lowering interest rates to essentially zero or even negative in some countries. But now we face a dilemma. Central banks have used up their ammunition. Interest rates are already at historic lows. We've already done massive quantitative easing, printing trillions of dollars to buy bonds and support the economy. What happens when the next crisis hits and we can't lower rates further? What happens when we've already printed so much money that printing more risks, destroying the currency itself? This is the debt trap, and we are in it right now. The second cycle is what I call the internal order cycle. This relates to the political and social stability within a country. Throughout history, societies go through periods of cooperation and cohesion, followed by periods of conflict and fragmentation. During the cooperative phase, people generally agree on the rules of the game. There's a functioning social contract. Wealth gaps may exist, but they're not so extreme that they tear society apart. The political system, while imperfect, commands enough legitimacy that people accept its decisions. But over time, wealth and opportunity gaps tend to widen. The winners of one generation consolidate their advantages and pass them on to their children. The losers fall further behind. The middle class gets squeezed. And at some point, a critical threshold is crossed. The society splits into opposing camps. One group feels the system is rigged against them and wants to tear it down. Another group has benefited from the system and wants to preserve it. Sound familiar? This is where we are today in the United States and many other developed countries. We have wealth inequality at levels not seen since the 1920s. We have political polarization where the two sides can barely talk to each other, let alone compromise. We have declining trust in institutions, in government, in media, in expertise itself. We have rising populism on both the left and the right. And we have increasing conflict, not just political conflict, but actual violence in the streets. I've studied what happens when societies reach this point. History shows us that there are really only a few possible outcomes. Sometimes there's a peaceful rebalancing through reforms. The system adapts, wealth gets redistributed through taxation or other means, and social cohesion is restored. But more often, especially when combined with economic stress, the internal conflict escalates. It can lead to civil war, revolution, or the rise of an autocratic leader who promises to restore order. Now, let me be clear. I'm not predicting civil war in America, but I am saying that we are more fragmented, more divided, more at risk of internal breakdown than at any point since the Civil War. And when you combine this internal stress with the debt problems I just described, you create a volatile and dangerous situation. The third cycle is the external order cycle. This is about the rise and fall of global powers and the international order they create. For the past 75 years, we've lived in what I call the American world order. After World War II, the United States emerged as the dominant global superpower. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. American military might was unquestioned. International institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund were created under American leadership. This order brought enormous benefits. It facilitated global trade, spread prosperity, and prevented major wars between great powers. But like all world orders throughout history, it's not permanent. Eventually, a rising power challenges the dominant power. This is happening now with China. Over the past 40 years, China has experienced the fastest economic rise of any country in history. It's gone from a poor agricultural economy to the world's second largest economy, and in some measures, the largest. It's building a world-class military. It's creating alternative institutions to challenge American-led ones, and it's asserting itself more aggressively on the world stage. Now, I want to be very careful here. I'm not saying China is good or bad, and I'm not saying America is good or bad. I'm simply observing the pattern. When a rising power challenges an established power, the established power rarely gives up its position peacefully. History is filled with examples. Athens versus Sparta, Rome versus Carthage, Britain versus Germany. In most cases, these competitions ended in war. The question we face today is whether we can navigate this transition peacefully or whether we're headed for a major conflict between the United States and China. And here's what worries me. The conditions that typically lead to war are all present. We have economic competition, competing ideologies, territorial disputes, and most dangerously, a security dilemma where each side's actions to protect itself make the other side feel threatened. leading to an escalating cycle of distrust and hostility. So we have three massive cycles all coming to a head at the same time. A debt crisis that limits our economic options, internal political and social fragmentation that paralyzes our ability to respond effectively, and external competition with a rising power that threatens our global position. This is the convergence I mentioned at the beginning. This is why I've been sounding the alarm. Now, I know this all sounds pretty grim, but I didn't spend 50 years studying history and markets just to tell you we're doomed. I did it to understand how to navigate these transitions. Because here's the thing, while these cycles are powerful and predictable, they're not deterministic. How we respond matters enormously. The choices we make as individuals, as communities, and as nations will determine whether we come out of this period stronger or weaker. Let me tell you about some of the principles I've developed for navigating periods of upheaval like this. The first principle is what I call radical open-mindedness. In times of transition, the old playbook stops working. What worked in the past may not work in the future. The experts who were right for decades may suddenly be wrong. This is why you need to constantly question your assumptions, seek out different perspectives, and be willing to change your mind when the evidence changes. I learned this lesson the hard way back in 1982. I was convinced that the massive debt levels in Latin America and the banking system would lead to a depression. I was so confident that I bet everything on it. I went on television and predicted economic catastrophe, and I was completely wrong. The Federal Reserve found a way to manage the crisis, and instead of depression, we got a massive bull market. That mistake nearly destroyed me. I had to let go of employees. I was so broke, I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to support my family. But that failure taught me humility. It taught me that I don't have all the answers. It taught me the importance of creating systems and processes to stress test my thinking. At Bridgewater, we institutionalize this through our culture of radical transparency and believability-weighted decision-making. We assume that no one, including me, has a monopoly on truth. We constantly challenge each other, and we weight people's opinions based on their track record of being right about similar situations. The second principle is diversification, but not just diversification in the traditional sense of spreading your investments across different stocks. I'm talking about deep structural diversification across different types of assets, different countries, different currencies. The kind of diversification that protects you no matter which way the world goes. Here's what I mean. Right now, most people's wealth is concentrated in a few areas. If you're American, you probably own a home in America, stocks in American companies, bonds denominated in dollars, maybe some cash in a dollar-denominated bank account. That's not diversified. That's a massive concentrated bet on the United States. If the dollar declines, if American assets underperform, if the United States experiences a serious crisis, your entire net worth takes a hit. True diversification means spreading your bets across different scenarios. Some assets that do well in inflation, like gold, commodities, and inflation-protected bonds. Some assets that do well in deflation, like nominal bonds and cash. Some assets that do well when America does well. Some that do well when other parts of the world outperform. This is what I call an all-weather portfolio, and it's designed to perform reasonably well across a wide range of economic environments. Let me give you some specifics. In my view, a well-balanced portfolio should include stocks for growth, bonds for stability, gold as a hedge against monetary chaos, and commodities as a hedge against inflation. But beyond that, you need geographic diversification. Don't just own American stocks. Own European stocks, Asian stocks, emerging market stocks. Don't just hold dollars, hold euros, yen, yuan. This way, if one currency or one country runs into trouble, you're not wiped out. The third principle is understanding that cash is not always king. This is counterintuitive for most people. We're taught to save money, to keep a rainy day fund, to have cash on hand for emergencies. And in normal times, that's good advice, but we're not in normal times when governments and central banks are printing money at unprecedented rates, when debt levels are unsustainable, when the risk of currency debasement is real. Holding cash becomes a losing proposition. I've been through this before. In the 1970s, I watched as inflation destroyed the purchasing power of the dollar. People who held cash lost 30 to 40% of their wealth in real terms over the course of a decade. Meanwhile, people who owned gold, real estate, and commodities preserved and even grew their wealth. History is filled with examples of currencies losing value or even becoming worthless. It happened to the German mark in the 1920s. It happened to the Chinese currency in the 1940s. It happened in Argentina, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and many other countries in recent decades. I'm not saying the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow, but I am saying that the risks are higher than most people realize. And if you're holding significant wealth in cash or cash equivalents, need to think carefully about whether that's really safe. The fourth principle is to have a plan for different scenarios. At Bridgewater, we don't try to predict the future. Instead, we map out different possible futures and position ourselves to do okay in all of them. This is scenario planning, and it's something everyone should do. Think about the major uncertainties we face. Will we have inflation or deflation? Will there be a major war, or will we avoid it? Will democracy survive, or will we see the rise of authoritarianism? Will China continue to rise, or will it stumble? Will technological innovation accelerate, or will progress stall? For each of these questions, you can imagine different outcomes, and for each outcome, you can think about how it would affect your life and your wealth. For example, if we get high inflation, you want to own real assets like real estate, commodities, and inflation-protected securities. If we get deflation, you want to own high-quality bonds, cash. If there's a major war, you want to own gold and defense stocks. If democracy breaks down, you might want to have some of your wealth outside the country. I'm not saying you need to act on all of these scenarios, but you should at least think through them and have some hedges in place. Now, let me talk about something that might surprise you. Despite all the challenges I've outlined, I'm actually optimistic about humanity's long-term future. Why? Because I've seen how resilient and adaptive we are. Yes, we're going through a difficult transition. Yes, the next decade is going to be turbulent. But these transitions have happened before, and we've always come through them. Think about what the world looked like in 1945. Europe and Asia were in ruins. Tens of millions were dead. The global economy was shattered. The future looked bleak. And yet, within a generation, we had rebuilt stronger than ever. We created the most prosperous period in human history. We lifted billions out of poverty. We achieved technological miracles. We extended lifespans. We reduced violence. All of this happened after one of the darkest periods in history. Or think about the 1970s. Stagflation, energy crises, social unrest, the Cold War at its peak. Many people thought capitalism had failed, that the West was in terminal decline, that the Soviet Union would win. But they were wrong. We adapted. We reformed our economic systems. We embraced new technologies. And we entered a period of unprecedented growth and innovation. The pattern throughout history is that periods of crisis and transition, while painful, often lead to renewal and progress. The old systems that no longer work get swept away. New systems emerge. New leaders rise. New ideas take hold. This is the process of creative destruction that Joseph Schumpeter wrote about. It's uncomfortable while it's happening, but it's ultimately how we move forward. So what does this mean for you? It means you need to prepare for turbulence, but you shouldn't lose hope. It means you should diversify your assets, but you should also invest in yourself, your skills, your knowledge, your relationships. These are the things that no government can inflate away, no market crash can destroy. It means you should pay attention to what's happening in the world, but you shouldn't be paralyzed by fear. Yes, we face serious challenges. Yes, the risks are real, but there are also enormous opportunities for those who are prepared and adaptable. Let me share one more observation. Throughout my study of history, I've noticed that the people who do best during periods of transition are not necessarily the smartest or the richest or the most powerful. They're the ones who are most adaptable. They're the ones who can see reality clearly, who don't get caught up in ideological thinking or wishful thinking. They're the ones who can work well with others, who can build bridges across divides. They're the ones who maintain their principles but remain flexible in their methods. This is what I've tried to do throughout my career. When I started Bridgewater in my apartment in 1975, I had no money, no connections, no special advantages. What I had was curiosity, work ethic, and a willingness to learn from my mistakes. I built a culture of radical truth and radical transparency because I knew that no individual, including me, was smart enough to navigate complexity alone. We needed to harness the collective intelligence of the group. And here's what I've learned. When you create an environment where people can speak honestly, where ideas are evaluated on their merits rather than on who proposes them, where failure is seen as a learning opportunity rather than something to hide, amazing things become possible. This is how Bridgewater became one of the largest and most successful hedge funds in the world. Not through genius, but through process, discipline, and continuous learning. I believe this same approach can work for individuals, for communities, and for nations. We need to be more honest with ourselves about our problems. We need to have difficult conversations. We need to put aside our tribal identities and work together on solutions. We need to be willing to try new approaches and abandon old ones that no longer work. The challenges we face with debt, with inequality, with geopolitical competition, they're all solvable, but they require us to be honest about the trade-offs. There's no magic solution that makes everyone happy. We need to have serious discussions about how to restructure debt, how to rebalance our economy, how to invest in the future, how to compete with China while avoiding war. These discussions will be uncomfortable. People will have to give up things. But if we approach them with good faith and a genuine desire to find solutions, we can get through this. Let me give you an example. The debt problem. As I mentioned, we have unsustainable levels of debt across the developed world. At some point, this debt will need to be restructured. That can happen in several ways. We can inflate it away by printing money, which hurts savers and people on fixed incomes. We can default on it, which hurts creditors and can cause financial chaos. We can grow our way out of it through productivity gains, which is the best option, but also the hardest. Or we can do some combination of all three. The right approach depends on the specific circumstances of each country. But whatever we do, it's going to be painful for someone. The key is to distribute that pain as fairly as possible and in a way that preserves social cohesion. This requires political leadership, which unfortunately is in short supply right now. But I believe it's possible if we can move beyond the polarization and finger-pointing. Similarly, with inequality, the gaps between rich and poor, between different regions, between those with education and those without, these gaps are tearing us apart. We need to address them. But how? Higher taxes on the wealthy, more investment in education and infrastructure, changes to our economic system? There are many possible approaches, and reasonable people can disagree about which is best. But we need to have the conversation and we need to do something because the status quo is not sustainable. On the geopolitical front, the competition with China is perhaps the most difficult challenge. Neither country wants war. Both countries have nuclear weapons. Both countries are deeply integrated economically. And yet, the structural forces pushing us toward conflict are strong. We need statesmanship of the highest order to navigate this. We need to find ways to compete without triggering a military confrontation. We need to establish rules of the road, red lines that both sides respect. We need dialogue and understanding even when we disagree. I've spent time in China. I've met with Chinese leaders, understand their perspective. They see the world very differently than we do. But I also believe that with effort and good faith, we can find ways to coexist. It won't be easy. There will be conflicts and tensions, but the alternative, a major war between nuclear powers, is unthinkable. Now, I want to come back to you as an individual, because ultimately, while these macro forces are important, what matters most is how you live your life, how you prepare for the future, and how you contribute to making things better. You can't control global events, but you can control how you respond to them. First, take care of the basics. Make sure you have some savings, some emergency funds. Don't be over-leveraged with debt. Have insurance against catastrophic risks. These are the foundation of financial security, and they matter even more in uncertain times. Second, invest in yourself. Your earning power is your most valuable asset. Keep learning, keep developing new skills, build relationships with people in different fields, different countries, different walks of life. These connections will be valuable no matter what happens. Third, stay informed, but don't obsess. Yes, you should pay attention to major trends and events, but don't let the news consume your life. Most of what you read is noise, not signal. Focus on the big picture patterns, not the daily fluctuations. Fourth, be kind and build community. In times of stress, the people who thrive are those who have strong social connections, who help each other, who work together. Don't be a lone wolf. Be part of something larger than yourself. And finally, maintain perspective. Yes, we live in challenging times, but every generation faces challenges. Your grandparents lived through the Depression and World War II. Your parents lived through the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation. Every era has its crises. What matters is how we respond to them. I've had an extraordinary life. I've been fortunate beyond measure. And if there's one lesson I want to pass on, it's this. Life is full of ups and downs, successes and failures, good times and bad times. What separates those who flourish from those who don't is not the absence of difficulties, but the ability to face them with courage, honesty, and resilience. We're entering a period of transition. It will be bumpy, there will be setbacks and surprises, but there will also be opportunities and breakthroughs. The future is not predetermined. We have agency, we have choice. And if we choose wisely, if we work together, if we're honest with ourselves about our challenges, while remaining optimistic about our potential, we can create a better world. This is my message to you. Prepare for difficulty, but don't lose hope. Diversify your risks, but don't stop taking chances. Understand the patterns of history, but remember that you can help shape the future. We are living through one of the pivotal moments of our time. How we navigate it will determine what kind of world we leave to our children and grandchildren. I believe in human ingenuity. I believe in our ability to solve problems. I believe that despite our flaws and failures, we're capable of remarkable things when we put our minds to it. The challenges ahead are real, but so are our strengths. Let's use them wisely.